water is a basic need for all living beings. But our resources are under threat. Scientists say freshwater supplies from the Tibetan plateau will decline irreversibly by 2060. What can we do today to mitigate the domino effect of such a collapse in Central and South Asia's water supply systems? That's what we'll talk about today. Hello and welcome to Eco India. I'm Sanuta Raghu. Let's start in Bengaluru in India's south. Over the last decade, the city has worked aggressively to build systems to treat all the sewage it generates. Following a government directive, larger apartment complexes now have to set up sewage treatment plants to treat and reuse their wastewater. We visited two such plants to find out if this approach is easing Bengaluru's water woes.
Ajit Panikar oversees the sewage treatment plant at his apartment complex. The software engineer lives in Bengaluru, India's fastest growing city that's struggling to meet its water needs. It's the country's first to put residents in charge of their wastewater, a novel approach that experts say can curb water pollution and save fresh water.
Traditionally, sewage treatment happens in centralized treatment plants, but what Bangalore has done, because the city has sort of leapfrogged in its development, the utilities haven't been able to keep pace with this ever-growing demand for sewage treatment. In 2016, they introduced a mandate requiring people to treat their own sewage in decentralized sewage treatment plants located in apartments.
Apartments in complexes like the one Ajit Panikar calls home. It installed a conventional sewage treatment plant to comply with the rules. It's one of more than 2,500 small-scale sanitation systems now operating in Bengaluru. Collectively, this decentralized network treats about 20% of the city's sewage. Households use this recycled water to flush toilets and water gardens.
In 2013, we had an issue our water source was borewell and groundwater level depleted totally, and we started buying water from outside.
That's no longer necessary thanks to the complex on-site sewage treatment plant. But many Bengaluru residents complain about the high acquisition and running costs.
We are shelling out around 60,000 rupees per month for an average, and also end of the year, every year, we need an overhauling. CP operator working in 3 different shifts, and a constant monitoring is needed. Every day, 2 times we used to monitor our SCP water quality and MLSS level.
In addition to the operating costs and the labor required to run them, such plants also take up lots of space. Poor maintenance can lead to unpleasant odors and disturbing noise. A local startup sought to address these issues with a small-scale treatment plant that is cheaper and easier to operate.
When you start to look at solutions, right, or how do you treat the sewage, we said, let's look at nature. How did nature solve this problem, right? When nature we can never have this blowing air business or adding bacteria every half an hour, 1 hour. It's not sustainable. So how did nature solve? So we found anaerobic bacteria is one organism which does a lot of breakdown. So what is anaerobic bacteria? We found septic tank has got anaerobic bacteria. That's how septic tank treats to some extent. And also we found a cow's stomach is a very good anaerobic bacteria machine, so to speak. It can break down everything.
Mimicking a cow's digestive system, this plant treats sewage with bacteria in underground chambers. Gravity moves the sewage from chamber to chamber. The further it goes, the more the solid waste settles down and the water gets clearer, until it is finally safe to use for non-potable purposes. With the plant stored away underground, residential buildings have more room for communal spaces like playgrounds. At 22 lakh rupees or 27,000 euros, these plants are somewhat more expensive to install. But in the long run, the company says they are far more cost efficient. Senthil Kumar Natarajan lives in an enclave that recently switched to this model. He's happy with the result.
The quality of treated water, if you see that in a glass, it looks crystal clear. So during the final output, you get a clear water. And we utilize this water for our gardening. The groundwater is saved.
But 6 years after the city mandated private sewage treatment, recycled water still only accounts for 10% of Bengaluru's daily water consumption. More than half of the water treated on private premises remains unused and is funneled into lakes in and around Bengaluru. This water is rich in nutrients that are good for gardening but harmful to lake ecosystems. Here, they contribute to toxic foam frothing on the water's surface.
We find ourselves at a very interesting point in the sewage treatment story, because if the government actually finds alternate uses for this water, it'll not only incentivize residents to maintain their systems better and have better quality effluent, but it can also help with the water scarcity problem in the city as a whole, because it'll bring down the water that's needed for things like construction, industry, greening parks, and as well as even thinking about aquifer recharge if it's done well. So the possibilities are endless, but it just really requires planning.
That's a hopeful outlook for other cities across India that face a fast approaching water crisis, where innovations in wastewater management could make a clear difference.
Further east from Bengaluru, the self-contained community of Auroville in Tamil Nadu is aiming to set the standards for a net energy positive habitat. Its co-housing project, Humanscapes, is in sync with nature. The community, for example, collects rainwater in a unique manner. Let's see how.
Have you ever stopped to notice how our cities are developing?
There are buildings and there are roads.
This is contractor Logu, and he is famous for building green buildings.
People call it a greenhouse if buildings are present with plants and trees. But we don't feel that way since we've been doing only that.
Sustainability is very simple. Just think twice. Do we really need this? It can be even for a pen which you buy or a square foot of building you build.
Ramya is an architect. She and her team worked under Suhasini, an architect and urban planner, to build an urban habitation project in Auroville, Puducherry. They called it Humanscapes, and with Humanscapes, they had one goal.
If we can build differently, with different kinds of technology and planning, and actually have young people live in it, you actually influence a generation. That is what Humanscapes is about. How to make changes for building a more sustainable India.
So, you want to build a sustainable building. What do? The first thing is never mess with the land's natural landscape.
When a drop of water falls here, where does it go and where does it end up? This is over a long geological period that water has carved the landscape. And while you disturb it, what happens is what happens in Chennai every monsoon. Water goes and stands in some people's houses and other people don't even have drinking water. So the best way to avoid this kind of urban flooding or urban droughts is to manage your water. Most of the water that falls on our head is what we should work with.
So, this is a rainwater harvesting tank. We have channeled the rainwater from the roof in different areas below. They are connected to chains. We can see the chain system in old traditional houses. The rainwater holds on to these chains and it flows without spillage. If we allow the water to hit the ground with the same force, it leads to high soil erosion. So we reduce the speed by laying pebbles on the ground. And the speed is குறைச்சிடுறோம். In the main area, bricks have been placed in between the cement blocks for the rainwater to penetrate and flow. In the center, we have a bore well. Even if there is excess rainfall, the water will drain slowly. This is how we harvest rainwater here. So, rainwater harvest பண்றோம்.
Now that you understand how to build according to the topography, you need to focus on the climate zone you're going to build in. Humanscapes, for example, is built in a hot humid zone, where the main problem is heat and humidity. When these two come together, a person living here tends to sweat a lot more than those in other regions. This directly increases one's dependency on fans and air conditioners, and indirectly the dependence on electricity. To reduce this, the architects focused on cross ventilation in each house.
So on the breeze, when we check for the direction of the breeze, it's in the north-south direction. That's why all the openings in the buildings face this direction. Our next problem is heat.
So we look at how the sun moves, what time of the day the sun hits which part of the building, and what do you put inside the building in those places where the sun is hitting.
In this building, the walls are 24 centimeters thick and are built with natural red soil. The clay-type wall doesn't allow the heat to penetrate through. By the time it penetrates 4 to 5 centimeters through the wall, the sun has set, and so the house doesn't warm up at all.
So it's between the sun and the wind and the angle of the building, you actually work out how to put various functions inside the building. And then you have comfort. It's as simple as that.
If you were to apply just these two concepts to developing urban cities, you're barely scratching the surface of sustainability. While constructing buildings in cities, we need to remember that the building industry is one of the major contributors of energy in this world. In 2020, this sector accounted for 36% of global final energy consumption and 37% of all energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. A huge contributor to this change is the building materials you choose.
We want to have building materials which have very little carbon footprint. So we look at what is it that we want to avoid or at least reduce.
For instance, with the ceiling, they use the wall structure instead of depending on reinforced concrete.
And the curved surfaces
formed as bricks are arranged between two beams. In normal fired bricks, there is no steel, cement or plaster needed.
Apart from reducing steel and cement, they recycle three important waste materials in the building industry that would have otherwise ended up in landfills. First, construction waste was crushed and used in the earthen walls. Then, to cut down heat, they used discarded third-quality white ceramic tiles for the roof and waste limestone pieces for the walls. Not only do these two materials help in decarbonizing the building, but they are also cost-efficient materials.
The important thing is that there is no material cost in the construction as we use waste and scrap material. Every 2 weeks, we collected scraps in small quantities from local shops in a vehicle. We repeated this process as these materials are not found that easily.
There's only so much that you can influence with design. So post-occupancy, how do you actually influence a sustainable lifestyle?
So that's what we aimed at. We said we aim at a youth housing program that single couples and even small families to live together in a way that they share. And what do they share? They share space.
Do you think it's comfortable?
It's very comfortable for me here. I moved here in February. I haven't felt lonely since then because there are enough people to talk to here. On days I haven't prepared dinner, they make dinner for me too. I enjoy that, sharing a lot.
To encourage people to share and reduce resources, a utility block with an area set aside for waste segregation and common washing machines is included.
Instead of buying a washing machine and spending more on electricity, water, we have common ones here.
Most of us here won't waste water. Drainage water is recycled and reused for the garden.
You can't skip talking about electricity consumption when you're thinking of a sustainable building. For the Indian subcontinent, particularly Tamil Nadu, one of the most reliable sources of renewable energy at a domestic scale is rooftop solar panels. Combined with an efficient building design, Suhasini says it's making a significant difference in electricity consumption among the residents.
What is actually the average energy consumed per person for an MIG housing, which is middle income group housing? That's what we're addressing. We're not addressing a low income group housing yet. We said we will try for 45 kilowatts per person, about 30% less than what the standard is, and we're achieving it.
Can someone replicate human scapes in another place?
Sure, it can be done, but it can't be copied as such. This design works out only in this context. We have red earth here, so we have used the poured earth technology. What materials are available locally? How does it reflect in that climate? We have got to consider all this.
Suhasini and her team hope that this model of humanscapes with a focus on co-sharing could be adopted by college campuses in the future. And that's just the beginning. Sustainable buildings could help develop cities that aren't just resilient to climate change, but also contribute less to it. This isn't the only solution, but it's definitely a much needed start.
The fruits, vegetables and grains we eat require a lot of water to be grown well. In 2021-22, India was the second largest consumer of rice in the world, just behind China. It takes nearly 5,000 litres of water to produce 1 kg of grain. A special technique helps minimize this. Let's see how.
Anyone who has driven through the state of Punjab is familiar with this sight. Fields of paddy, the rice crop. Historically, rice has been grown here just like this. The method is called puddling, where crops are submerged in water for weeks. This is one of the most water-intensive ways to cultivate paddy, and the results are in. Punjab is now facing an increasingly severe water crisis. Farmers are now having to figure out ways around it, like Gurpreet Singh, who is experimenting with a technique that is making inroads in North India.
Every year, the water level is falling by 5 to 10 feet, or up to 3 meters in our land. We adopted the direct sowing of rice technique because it requires less water.
To understand how the direct sowing technique works though, we've got to look at the older method first. Traditionally, saplings of rice are grown in a nursery for weeks and transplanted into the field, which are flooded. But rice is not actually an aquatic crop. It just has a great ability to tolerate being submerged. The water's main role is to repel pests and works as a natural weedicide. In around 5 months, the crops can be harvested and turned into rice in the form we know. But this method uses up to 5,000 liters of water per kilogram of rice. And as Punjab's water table shrinks, it is predicted that rice may not grow here in a few decades. Direct sowing, or the DSR technique, is the alternative where seeds are sown directly by hand or machines. More seeds may be needed for the same area, but yields remain largely on par with the traditional method. Machines also save labor and related costs, an advantage in Punjab where there is a labor shortage.
With DSR, I have saved almost 30% of my water, and you can see here, this has not affected the quality of my paddy at all.
The Punjab state government is now offering farmers a compensation of ₹1,500 or around €18 a season to switch to the new method to conserve water large scale.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Dr. Gurdev Singh Khush is an independent agronomist from the region who says that DSR is the way forward.
It's a very important technology. In other countries, they also do the DSR. Australia, Europe, parts of United States. So it's not any big invention. It's there. It's used in other places. So it should be used in North India, but they have to adapt this to the local conditions.
By local conditions, he means there are two main obstacles here. Farmers in Punjab generally don't own land large enough to justify the cost of machines on their own, and paying for labor to plant rice by hand, especially during a labor shortage, is costly.
The second reason is that there are a lot of weed problems.
If there's no water, weeds compete with plants, and pests attack freshly sown seeds. This, incidentally, is why more seeds are needed for the same yield. Controlling weeds and pests also requires more labor, and weedicides and pesticides. These can be expensive and also bad for the soil in the long run. It's a tough choice between saving water and protecting soil. But there are other reasons. Testing has shown that DSR crops need to be irrigated exactly 3 weeks after sowing to create the best results.
The main issue is that I need to pump water at a particular time. And what do I do if the electricity supply fails like it often does? Our crops dry and die.
Shiv Shambhu belongs to the majority of small farmers who have not switched over yet.
Okay, you convinced me to adopt DSR. I agree that it will save water. But my father and grandfather have been practicing puddling. How can I let go of our traditional practice?
The state needs to find a way to conserve water, but equally the concerns of farmers need to be addressed, from the affordability of machines to the right weedicides and electricity issues, before there can be a large-scale adoption.
The emphasis on dry seeding is very valid. It's very important. So my personal feeling is that in 10 years or so, most every farmer will switch to direct sowing.
The first steps have already been taken, and supporting farmers in making the switch will take the state and its goals of water conservation a long way.
Bhutan is touted for its gross national happiness and its positive carbon balance sheet. But this hasn't shielded it from the drastic effects of climate change. The country is struggling with a water crisis. Its residents oscillate between having too much water or too little water. How are they tackling this? Let's find out.
For the people of Bhutan, glaciers and mountains are sacred, like these 7,000-metre peaks at the border to Tibet, though the glacier's days appear to be numbered. The ice is melting due to climate change, as shown on this animation by the WWF and the UN. The glacial lakes have become a major flood threat. Nearly 20 mountain lakes are currently at risk. In the south of Bhutan, the monsoon season is normally in July. But in recent years, the heavy rains have come to Sirangte earlier in the month of May. The seeds sown by local farmers were washed from the fields. And the rainwater vanishes almost as suddenly as it appeared. Springs are running dry and mountain streams have slowed to a trickle. According to the UN, more than 60% of Bhutan's population has no access to clean drinking water. We head out to see the source of the village's water supply, some 16 kilometres away. Village leader Nandara Karel wants to show an environmental expert the situation they're facing here. There have been frequent disputes with the neighbouring villages. The rules for access to spring water are strict. Namgay, who works for Bhutan's Tarayana Foundation, hopes to improve water management here. The project receives support from the International Climate Initiative.
This water belongs to another group. We've already spoken many years ago that we can share the water for cultivation. Everything but Sirangte. They also have 400 households and a population of 4,000 to 5,000. So they're dipping into this water. At least they share the drinking water with us, but it's not a solution.
The young students who attend Sirangte's central school are also affected by the water shortage. The 860 students have just one source of water for bathing and laundry.
They don't have enough water to wash their body, neither they have water to wash their clothes. And because of that one, they get all sorts of skin diseases, and that is one very big challenge.
The narrow valley in the south of Bhutan, near the border to India, has a subtropical climate. At the valley's edge lies the village of Dechen Pelri. The water supply is a problem here too. The monsoon has become irregular, and when it does rain, the torrential downpours often wreak havoc.
When the rain falls, all the soils are coming down, and then all like a landslide or erosions are falling down, and they're destroying the water source. Through IKI project, we want to do that totally mountain replantations.
The village built a water tank to irrigate their fields. The water comes from the mountains through plastic pipes, but they're often damaged in landslides. And then there's the elephants.
They come into the village almost every night. Small groups of young elephants. Usually they tear off clusters of bananas or bamboo plants. 5 minutes later, they leave. We try to scare them off with noise and our flashlights.
An electric fence is being built to keep the elephants out. That way the herds will stay in their natural habitat, where they have an important role to play.
The elephant is an architect of the forest. He decides what the forest is going to look like. And if there's a thick bushes, he just go in, he trample it, and he opens up for the regeneration of forest.
Bhutan's forests are important to the country's water supply. They also play a vital role in maintaining biodiversity and protecting the climate. Tiny Bhutan is doing its best to adapt to climate change. the residents of the mountainous kingdom have little other choice.
Some scientists predict that the wars of the future will be fought over water. Many in our generation are already living with the inaccessibility to potable water. The smallest individual action could help today. Fix that leaky tap. Turn off the running water while brushing your teeth. Have shorter showers. I'll leave you with that and see you again next week. Goodbye and thanks for watching.